real success stories told by the people who lived them.
We're going to have some guests on this show that everybody knows, and we're going to have guests on this show that nobody knows yet.
One by one, Nick Hyder is adding hits to the hit streak.
Blessings, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Hit Streak. I'm your man, Nick Hyder, and in the Hit Lab with me today, I've got an extra special treat for you. Folks, this guy that's hanging out with me today is a 6-time author, and he's a founder and executive director of Restore Small Groups. I've got Scott Reall in the building. Scott, I'm so happy to have you. Thank you for being here, my man.
It's exciting to be here, Nick. This is a great place. I'm so excited to be in the Hit Streak.
That's right, baby. That's the first one. We're going to add one to the Hit Streak right there. How about that? So, tell me a little bit about what is Restore Small Groups. First of all, let's start right there.
We provide healing communities by doing small groups. When we say small groups, it's a very intimate, very vulnerable process. We limit it to about 10 people per group, and we have 2 facilitators per group. And it just brings people into this, what we call sacred space, where they can really fully be known to each other by God. And we really believe there's nothing as healing and life-changing as being in a healing community where you have the opportunity to truly be vulnerable and intimate and then really let people know your story. Dr. Kurt Thompson says in Anatomy of Soul, there's no greater need for all human beings than the experience of being fully and completely known and the feeling of being felt. And that's what we do. We introduce people to feelings, chance to tell their stories, and put them on a path to transformation.
I love it. You're literally doing God's work.
We think so.
Absolutely. I know so. Right. I know so. So, folks, you guys need to check out Scott and Restore Small Groups online. They have a great website, restoresmallgroups.org, and you can check them out on Instagram at Restore Small Groups. Once again, at Restore Small Groups on Instagram. Now, let's learn a little bit about Scott. So, because I got a lot of questions for you, right? So, like one of the things that's the hardest thing to do, man, is found and fund and operate a nonprofit. It's incredibly hard because everybody involved, people have to make livings, but at the same time, you're doing it for a greater purpose, and that's a thin line that you go back and when you make decisions to worry with, right? So let's learn a little bit about you, though. So Scott, tell me a little bit like how you got here.
Well, it's been an amazing journey, which is why I love the word journey, because it's that process. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My dad was a famous athlete. He was a baseball pitcher, and he had an opportunity to play with the New York Giants back then. They were before they moved to San Francisco, and but World War II and interrupted all that. And he didn't go to the major leagues, but he became a coach and a teacher in the Columbus area. And so I grew up in a gym on a ball field with any baseball, basketball, football, just playing athletics, and that's how I grew up. And then when I was about in my late 20s, my family moved to Nashville. And because I was teaching and coaching up in Cleveland, Ohio, I had tried out for the Cleveland Browns after college, and I didn't make it, so I stayed in northern Ohio as a teacher and a coach. Well, it snowed. The snow was on the ground until like May.
That's right.
And my brother was down here in Nashville, and so we came down here on spring break in about 1978, and it was sunny and warm, and it was snow and cold in northern Ohio, so decided to come down here. And so we did. We moved down here, and I was working in the fitness industry, and then I ended up working with the YMCA in 1988 as a senior wellness director. Little did I know that God was going to meet me in that process and transform my life. My job as a wellness director was to get people their exercise prescriptions, to meet with them, find out what their needs were, kind of test their physical capabilities, then make an exercise prescription for that. And this was about a time, if you'd have met me back then, you would have met a very physically fit man, a very kind, very nice man, but secretly on the inside, I was dying.
Okay.
I had struggled with depression and some anxiety issues since I was a little boy. And then I turned to some addictive behaviors that I kept hidden and were just destroying my life. And so, but nobody would have known.
There's so many types of addictive behavior.
I mean, you can be addicted to anything.
That's right.
And matter of fact, Dr. Gerald May says in Addiction and Grace that to be human is to be addicted. I mean, whether it's, you can be addicted to serving at church. I mean, it can be anything. And so, but it limited our freedom. And so I was, a guy from Willow Creek Church in Chicago came to Nashville to plant a church. And he was looking for a part-time job while he was growing his church. Well, he applied to work for me at the Green Hills YMCA. I think he really wanted to recruit people to his church, but he and I became really good friends. He had come from a family of alcoholics.
Okay.
And there was addiction in my family. And so I confided in him. He and I became really good friends, and he's the first person I ever talked to about what really was going on in my life.
Gotcha.
And he gave me a book, and the book completely transformed my life. It was called Power to Choose by Mike O'Neill, and it was the original 12 steps, but with Christ specifically as a higher power. And so it did several things for me. That instantly it introduced me to my Savior.
Yeah.
Introduced me to a small group process, which it recommended you go through the 12 steps, and it referred me to a very spiritual process that has changed millions of lives. The 12 steps has, and so I was doing a fitness assessment with this woman at about the same time I got that book, and she had joined the Y to lose weight. She'd gained like 30 pounds, and so I ran her through her tests, and I asked her something precipitated her weight gain. And she said that her husband had passed away like a year ago, and she had turned to food to medicate her grief.
Yeah.
And I knew right then and there, she had a hole in her soul. She filled hers with food. I had a hole in my soul. I filled mine with other behaviors. We both were in need of a spiritual and emotional process. Well, at the time, the YMCA, which it still is, our logo, our motto is that we change lives in spirit, mind, and body. Well, it was all physical, just like my life. And so I saw where we could be intentional about providing a spiritual and an emotional side of the triangle to help people heal. And so I went to my director and said, I'd like to start doing 12-step groups here at the Y.
Okay.
And it just exploded. People were coming from, churches were sending people, schools were sending people. I mean, and our members were coming in. It came with all kinds of issues. Most of them had nothing to do with alcohol or drugs, just life, which we would refer to as a human condition. And it just, so through that work, I won an award through the National Y called the Armstrong Award. And I got a scholarship.
Congratulations.
To go to seminary. Yeah, thank you. And I got a scholarship to go to seminary. I went to Covenant out of St. Louis. And while I was there, I saw how God was restoring lives through these small groups. And so I went to our CEO, Clark Baker, at the time, and I said, I'd like to start doing these as a full-time effort ministry of the YMCA called Restore Ministries. And in the year 2000, January, we kicked it off. And since then, we have served thousands and thousands of people around the world.
Man, what a story. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, let me ask you this. So, you hear the words small groups a lot, especially in the churches, and most of the time, depending on, especially the smaller churches, that ends up being somebody's living room or kitchen, and a book somebody picked out that you're going to read and talk about, and maybe some personal development and personal movements happen, but like not like they could. What's the difference in, like, I feel like you have a different definition of small groups than like the average person.
Well, it's interesting. Dr. Bradshaw, in his book, Healing and Shame Abides You, talks about shame and how when it becomes toxic, that it becomes an identity. It's like a fractured self. And so one of the main ways that a toxic shame infiltrates itself into our lives is we create a false self. So we're always being pretentious, always hiding, because what I believe is if you really know me, Nick, if you know the true things, all the things I struggle with, all my weaknesses, all my mistakes, you'll reject me, you'll abandon me. And I think that, so church has kind of set itself up to where we don't do these things. Christians don't do these things. And so there's a lot of shame, especially more shame for a Christian than anybody.
Yeah.
And so we hide. And so in our groups, we try to create what we call sacred space, We do feelings check-ins. We limit our groups so it's the same people for 8 weeks. No new people come in. So it's very intimate. And so
it's relationship driven.
Relationships what saves our lives. I mean, that's what
right.
we come from, relationships, as we were created for.
Yeah.
And so, and Bradshaw says that we're terrified of exposure, so we hide. But yet there's only one antidote to shame: exposure.
Right.
And that sets us free. And so what we do in our groups is we have guidelines that make it, that what is said in these groups stays in these groups. We're here to support, encourage, and love one another. We become, it's called a divine mirror. When a baby is born, they say the first thing a baby looks for is who's looking for them. They refer to that as a secure attachment. And that secure attachment mirrors back to the child who they really are. We develop our identity through our relationships, those who are secure, that are love us. And we really refer to that as a divine mirror. It mirrors back to the child, the person, who Christ really is in them. So when throughout our lives, they now know that we need, Nick, a secure attachment. And many of us did not have one growing up. We don't have one now. And so we continue to hide in a false self. And we live in a systemic society of shame. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so in our small groups, we really believe that that's the body of Christ that mirrors back to the person their true self, who they really are. And that can only happen if they can tell the truth. So we know that in recovery, the greatest need for a person is the ability to build healthy, supportive relationships that are strong in intimacy. The definition of intimacy for us is into me you see.
Okay.
I'm going to let you see in there, see the whole thing.
Love that. I'm going to use that.
And so having a process in an environment that's empathetic, where people are present and they're nurturing and they take initiative to move towards us, that is what we have created. I mean, we've had therapists, psychologists work with us for years. We've really worked hard to create an environment where God's Spirit can heal our lives, but it can only happen where the truth is exposed.
You know, we believe, I believe that, you know, everybody's got a story, and just like you were saying, we need to tell that story because, you know, I was one of those people that was ashamed and hid behind, I wouldn't say false pretenses, but the facade wasn't real, and
Sure.
you know, and then I learned one day that by telling my story, you know, the people that I'm most qualified to help are the people who are just like I used to be. You know what I'm saying? And so, as somebody that's already gone through certain journeys, there's other people that are just taking the same journey just within themselves, right? So, like, you know, I'm qualified to help the people most that are just like who I used to be, right?
You know, the greatest thing that we bring to life is our story.
That's right.
And where in our society does a person really have the opportunity? Here's my story. Who wants to hear it? Who wants to know it?
That's where the word history came from, right? His story.
I'm going to use that one.
There you go.
In Anatomy of the Soul, Dr. Kurt Thompson says that, and this is fascinating how they study the brain, that when a person is truly sharing their true story in a healing community, which he says best happens in a small group, when it's met with empathy, that how we remember our story is transformed. Do you know how I remember my story is going to determine today and tomorrow?
That's right.
And so I have to go back there and I have to share my true story. But here's what was brilliant about what they found, or even more fascinating, is that the listeners, even their stories are transformed by listening to another person's story.
That's right.
Because they experience what we call universality. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the only one who struggles with this. And so that's where shame is such a powerful part of our process, is that shame, I withdraw from relationships, I hide, where grace pulls me forward towards you. And that's where we heal. And that's where the divine mirror, you know, they have found that they're what they call mirror neurons, that in the brain, it mirrors and then it reproduces that.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating. We were truly committed and created to be known in deep, intimate relationships. They now know our brains won't even work in isolation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We were created for this kind of conversation we're having here today.
That's right.
It was, I'm not exactly sure this, but pretty close, but the Surgeon General that was under Obama's administration, he was there for like 8 years. And when he was done with that, he went and he wrote a book about his experience of working with Americans and their health. And what he found was that loneliness and isolation were an epidemic in our society. And what he said, Nick, was that people were seeking relationships for validation, not for true connection. And I think that's pretty, with
That's powerful, man.
social media and just the ways it is, there's such a shame-based society. Where do I go to get validation?
Yeah.
And if I'm hiding through a false self, that validation is not true anyway.
That's right. That's exactly right. Talk to me a little bit about, because when you're talking about all these things, there's the one thing that all of us have in common is that we all have hope. We hope that we don't get cancer, we don't get sick. We hope that our team wins the game. Everybody hopes for something, and I'm hearing a lot of hope. As a matter of fact, that's we inherited through a great insurance company a mission of hope, and that was helping other people every day. That's what it stood for. That was our company mission. We have a month of hope where we reach out and do some stuff for people every winter. You guys are providing hope in the human condition, yes?
Yes. And our definition of hope, I hope, there you go, is a very healthy one. Henry Nouwen says that what we call hope isn't true hope at all. It's wishes. We have a predetermined outcome that we are hoping for.
Yeah.
And he says that if what we hope for in this predetermined outcome does not occur, then that's going to lead to despair. And so we ask our groups that, how can true hope ever lead me to be hopeless? It's a contradiction. But now it says what true hope is, it's open-ended. He says it's not in circumstances, but in the promises of God. And so we find that for many of our participants, that's one of the first things we do is we discuss the definition of hope, how we really believe it to be, how we see it to be. Because if I have a dysfunctional definition of hope that I'm believing, it sets me up for failure.
That's right.
And so we do a lot of work on that. And our society is, again, it feeds into that we're so addicted to control.
Right.
And so we're wishing a lot, and we call it hope, and it's really not hope.
Gotcha. You're right. A wish is definitely not hope. It's totally different. What is so talk to me a little bit about, like, my dad operates a 501c3 nonprofit. It has to do with amateur sports, and I help him with that organization. I was there helping him when we went from LLC to 501c3 status, because he was truly a nonprofit. You know what I'm saying? Because he was always putting it back in. That's why he did it. But like, when you do that, there comes a great responsibility, because now all of a sudden there's a lot of judgment that gets thrown at you based on, like, if you drive a certain car or whatever and you operate a nonprofit. Being what you guys have done, 23 years. Look, if you stay open for 23 years, if you're just, the doors are just open and it didn't even go good, you did something amazing, right? 23 years is incredible. You're in year 23. Talk to me about, like, what kind of responsibility came with starting a nonprofit, and like, how are you able to leverage that for growth?
Well, the 23 years is truly a testimony of God doing for me or us what we could not do for ourselves. And I mean, I've been surrounded by amazing people, mostly volunteers, who went through our process and they had a transformative experience and said, how can I give back to what God has given to me? I mean, when you set people free and you really bring hope, and we've seen everything. I mean, I can tell you that, and we were talking earlier that whether I'm working in a prison where everybody in the group has killed somebody, or next day I'm at a church and everybody is saving people, there's no difference.
That's right. That's so powerful. Like, let's talk about that for a second. That's big. So when you say there's no difference, what do you mean?
In the human condition, the desire to be loved, to matter, to have purpose, significance, they just have different circumstances that they've grown up through, and different consequences. But at the core, they're all longing for the same thing. And you just see that. And just yesterday, I actually got a email from, in Belize, we have become the main rehabilitation process in their prison.
Okay.
And I'll just tell a little story, but her name's Miss Lily.
Yeah.
And she had killed a person, and she had spent I think 20 years in prison, and she was lonely, scared, no direction. And we started doing Journey to Freedom groups there about 15 years ago in her prison. And she got in a group, changed her life, introduced her to Christ. She became a facilitator and led other women in the prison for years. Well, she got paroled. And so now she drives a car around. She leads Journey to Freedom groups in the country of Belize. And
Wow.
it's just her, that's an example of somebody's life that was touched by this opportunity to be fully known. And now she has a meaning and a purpose, and Christ is at the center of that.
So Scott, tell me a little bit about, like, you mentioned prisons, you mentioned prison small groups, you mentioned church small groups, and you mentioned that a lot of them were like they were the same. Dude, you got to tell me more about that. Go on.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating if you work with people in a human condition. You know, one day I was in a prison and all the people in my group had murdered somebody, killed somebody, mostly gang related. And so we're going through this process, and you're just exposing their longings to be loved, needed, purpose. They want to know that there's a reason they're on this planet. And life has been hard, and they long to be loved and cared for. And then next day I'm at a church working with church staff, and same human condition. They're longing to be loved, that they matter, their purpose. That the only thing that's different are circumstances and kind of consequences of choices. But at the core, the human condition, we all come into this world needing to be loved, to be known, to know that we matter. And we need intimacy, we need relationships. And when that's not happening, our brains don't work, and then we respond in very dysfunctional ways.
Yeah.
And it's not limited to any one group of people or one country. And that's been the benefit for me of working with. We work in Ukraine, we work in Africa, we're in Central America, Scotland. It's the same. In the United States, it's always the same.
Yeah.
Different cultures, but same.
Right. That's right. So, you mentioned before that, told me before that hope can be learned. And right. And that's something that we inherited from the insurance company when we started, is the mission of hope. And we call that, it stands for helping other people every day. But, everybody hopes for something, regardless of their faith or anything. They hope they don't get cancer. They hope they hope they get the job. They hope they make it home safe. They hope their team wins the big game, right? Everybody hopes.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the very first week of Journey to Freedom. That's what we help establish with the group. We have a discussion on how we define hope, because what I had found was how we define hope is actually setting us up for despair. And the definition of despair is hopelessness. So how can true hope ever lead me to be hopeless? And what we saw was what Henry Nouwen talks about in his book, Seeds of Hope. He says what most humans call hope is just wishes. This is what I wish will happen. This is we have a predetermined outcome that we're wanting to control because we're so addicted to control in our society. And so when what I hope for, he says, what I'm wishing doesn't happen, then I become discouraged and I become full of despair. But Mr. Nouwen says what true hope is, he says it's open-ended. It's not in circumstances working out the way that I want, but it's in the promises of God. And so we really help people reflect on that and get a transformation of their definition of hope.
Speaking of transformations, I mentioned that you are a 6-time author, right? So, and we showed the first book, the Journey to Freedom. The second book, by the way, is The Journey to Healthy Living. The third, Journey to a Life of Significance. The fourth, Journey to Living with Courage. The fifth, Journey to Life After Loss. And number 6, which I've got a secret little advanced copy here. If you're watching, I'm showing it right here. The Journey of Transformation. And this is what your new podcast that just premiered is geared around, right? So talk to me about that.
Yes. So over the 20-some years I was working with people in transformation, and especially after writing Journey to Freedom, we were moving people towards transformation, and they were experiencing it at a level, but it wasn't going deep enough. And a real catalyst for that book for me was my own transformational journey with God. I saw that I'd kind of plateaued, hit a point where I was kind of stuck, and it wasn't going as deep. I wasn't experiencing the inner freedom that I wanted to. Well, it was about 7 years ago. I went to Florida, and I grabbed some books just to read when I was down there, and I found Dr. Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits.
I love that book.
Oh, it's one of the greatest books ever written.
I'm actually listening to it again right now.
I'm rereading it right now.
Yeah.
And what Dr. Covey says, it was so, I read one paragraph and it changed my whole perspective and understanding of transformation. He said that we will always be striking at the symptoms until we strike at the root cause. And he says the root cause is our paradigms. He says a paradigm is so our perception is what we really believe. It's our reality that we're seeing. And as you and I were talking about earlier, we don't believe what we see. We see what we believe.
That's right.
And he says that it creates a lens at which I see everything. And so all my responses are going to be determined from that lens. And he says we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are.
That's right.
And so I realized, gosh, we've got to go deeper into our stories and where those paradigms, because from the paradigm, Nick, comes the narrative. And that narrative is running through my mind all the time. And it is labeling me, it is defining me, and it's defining my reality, even if it's not real. And so we know that neural pathways are formed.
Yep.
And those, when we have a belief, it becomes physical. It becomes a reality.
Yeah.
It's in my brain, and that ingrained neural pathway is so ingrained that I'm going to respond that way all the time. So I have to take those thoughts captive. I have to go back into my story and really examine, where did that come from? Where do those toxic beliefs come from? And we usually look at the systems that shape those: my family of origin, school, church, and then just society in general. Those are probably the four main ones. And from that, I formed a belief about me. And I formed a belief about life, and I'm even deeper, my belief about God. And so this book helps people go deep into their stories, into the formation of that paradigm, and then come out of it with a new, to redirect, to reframe.
How do you, so people change their beliefs all the time, right? And full transparency, folks, you guys know how we do it here. We don't edit these shows. However, we were having a great conversation, and sometimes equipment fails, right? And it turned off, and we're bringing it back into where we lost it, and it was about 5 minutes or so went by before we even knew that, right? So, and we were talking about some really cool stuff. The reason I'm telling you that is because of this, because if you what you focus on grows, and you got to make your purpose greater than your problems. You got to focus on your purpose more than your problems, right? And it's through your struggle. We were born to struggle. It's through your struggle that you find your Christ-likeness, right? And quite frankly, your purpose. So, we were saying this before, that some of the things I've learned about the human mind. And first of all, your brain is there to survive, not thrive, right? You have to, you look at the evolution of man, all the things that we have that we enjoy today, the technology and all those things, they didn't happen naturally. Somebody had to think differently and be driven differently than everybody else to create those things. So you can change your belief system from what you were born. And how do you think you change your beliefs? It's one of the ways that you guys change your beliefs through your programs.
First of all, you need other people, because otherwise my interpretation of my reality becomes my reality.
Okay.
And so what I'm interpreting how my perceptions will never change in isolation. That's why our brains won't work. But if other people are around me and they're really intimately involved with empathy, then I begin to remember my story differently. And that doesn't change things that happen, but how I respond to it, I can begin to remember it differently.
Yeah.
And so, it's interesting. I love Dr. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And then also Eddie Hittisum. These are two people that were spent time in German concentration camps. Well, Frankl found that from stimulus, when he was in Auschwitz, and so was she, that he said that from stimulus to response, the human being has the power and freedom to make a choice how they're going to respond. And so what he found was this, he called it provisional existence, that this was the most dangerous mental state, that a person saw no hope. They saw no hope. And when they didn't see any hope that things could ever change, they lost the desire to live. And he said they just go over in a corner and die, or they got sick. They quit eating. They lost the will to live. But those who could find a spiritual reason to keep going, and that there was even in this hell that they were in, they could find a divine cause. That gave them a purpose and a meaning to keep moving. And so that is, to me, how do I change? So he said that when circumstances won't change, we must change. We must change. And so I just think that that journey of whatever happened in my past, that's the stimulus. And how I'm responding to it, I can remember it differently through a process with God. And then I can actually see it as, could it possibly be that the greatest things in my life could come from my mistakes, come from my failures, come from my hardships, come from my suffering? But we want to flee from that. And I have found, and I'm one of those. I don't like to suffer any more than anybody else, but there's no denying it's through my weaknesses, my losses, and my greatest sufferings that the best part of my life has actually grown.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You keep using the word respond a lot, and I love that because you either respond or you react to something. A reaction is a defensive mechanism, and a response is a offensive mechanism.
Well, remember what Covey says about response.
Oh, yeah.
We get the word responsibility, the ability to respond.
That's right. And, leaders respond. You know what I mean? They respond. They don't react. React is I don't like that word.
No, it's tied to my dysfunction.
That's right. Now, I mentioned the podcast. So, first of all, is the name of the podcast the name of the book? What's the name of the podcast?
Searching Inward.
Searching Inward. There you go. And it's available everywhere that you can stream a podcast.
Yeah, we're now on YouTube, and this is what is so exciting for us is that, this truly, Nick, from this, what you're doing with me today and from this podcast, we believe that what we are doing is the greatest need in the world, setting people free, getting to find love for themselves and for their lives, and then to bring this world to a place of peace. And we do that one life at a time, one group at a time. And there's just no greater environment for that to happen than what we're doing. And so this podcast is an opportunity for people to connect to what that journey is all about.
And I say this all the time. A lot of people ask me, with the accolades and the growth that we've had in life and business over the last 7 or 8 years, Nick, what are some of the most powerful tools that you have? And for the last about year and a half, this podcast has been by far my most powerful tool for growth, relationships, and everything because of situations just like this. Like if it wasn't for this show, we might not be connected and talking today. Probably not. And then we will live on together online forever because of this episode, right? So it's a timeless solution, and it's cool because podcast is kicking radio's tail these days from what I understand, and that's the thing is people like to listen to podcasts, and it gives a lot of people that wouldn't have a voice. It gives us creative control. There's nobody saying, Nick, you can't say that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So you can, I'm telling you all that because it's an investment, a major investment in time and resources to put something out there. And you do a podcast for everybody else, not for yourself, which is why you guys are doing it, right?
Yes. The center of books that I've written is hope. The center of our ministry is hope. And what we're trying to do is spread that hope, that people can know that they can change. Even though their circumstances may not, they can change. And if we can all rally around that opportunity, we can create an environment of hope. We can change the world. And it sounds like a grandiose plan, but it really is always been. And, back to what you asked me earlier in a podcast, how do I explain 23 years? God.
That's right.
Simply.
It's amazing. It's amazing you're still here.
I mean, I didn't think we'd make 1 year when I first started.
Yeah.
Then I didn't think we'd make 3. And then I think, well, we'll never make 10. And here we are, 23. And we thousands and thousands of lives around the world have been impacted. And we believe potentially millions will be impacted. And the thing about writing a book is that it's here forever.
That's right.
It's here forever.
That's right.
And it will go on and on long after I'm gone. And so, it's a great mission. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Oh, man. Folks, once again, we're with Scott Reall, 6-time author and the founder and executive director of Restore Small Groups. You can check him out on Instagram at Restore Small Groups and also on their website, restoresmallgroups.org. And the new podcast, Searching Inward, right? Available everywhere you stream a podcast. What are some of the effects, other effects that your books have had? Like, obviously, when you do one, if you didn't get good feedback or you weren't called to do another one, there wouldn't be 5 more to follow, right? So you obviously found some success in that through others. Talk to me about that. The groups meet in YMCAs, they meet in churches, they meet in universities, they meet in prisons, they meet in jails, drug courts. We do a lot of work with women with breast cancer recovery. We're in homeless shelters. We're in counseling centers. We're in the military. Wherever people wherever people are needing to change and finding that hope, which is everywhere. So we call those wells. That's where people who are thirsty go. And, wow, I love that.
And so that's really been for us an opportunity that, and sometimes we'll get an email from somebody around the world saying, I saw your podcast, changed my life. I read your book, I found it changed my life. We're in Bosnia now, and just continue to grow, because what we talked about earlier, it's just the human condition is everywhere.
Yeah.
And the longing to be free and to find hope, it's everywhere.
What are some of the ways, like being serving people worldwide? My wife and I just got back. We were out of the country for a little bit, and even we were at the guest at the National Prayer Breakfast in D.C. And I think there was 95 or 96 countries represented there in that thing. It was really cool. We got to meet a lot of great people. It was never more relevant to us at that time that, like, first of all, how this is the greatest country on earth, but man, we take a lot for granted here. You know what I mean? Because, like, it's different. It's so, man, the folks that are unhappy here, like, the grass ain't greener somewhere else. I promise. It's green where you water it, right? And you mentioned before that we're not made to be alone. We're 100% stronger together. There was a Disney movie that my son loved when he was young called A Bug's Life. And the whole premise of that movie was the ants versus the grasshoppers. And the grasshoppers, like, if they realize that they outnumber us 10 billion to 1 or whatever it was, that, like, it's over. And we are stronger together. Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided will not stand. Mm-hmm. We need to remember these things. Like, we're stronger together. We don't do anything by hurting each other. We need to give each other hand ups, not handouts, right? Like, we need to help each other out and build each other up. And, like, and the first place you should look is your faith, mm-hmm. right? But, like, when you're helping these other, I bet you, what's the response? How different is the response in these other places in the world versus here?
It's really similar. The big difference is the affluence of our society. I mean, first of all, I think everybody should have the opportunity to go to a third world country.
Absolutely.
and even the prisons. I mean, we work with prisons in the United States. Go to prison in a third world country, and you'll be like, boy, I got a really nice prisons in the United States. And it sounds, and then medical, but just seeing the poverty and just the lack that they struggle with. And then they have the same issues that we have.
I bet they're grateful for a lot less than we are,
I've actually found them to be more at peace.
Well, when I say for a lot less, grateful for a lot less things, I should have said they're more grateful than we are for a lot less.
Well, the big thing is, Nick, is that they have grown through a society where they don't have control over anything.
Yeah.
We're in control of everything. I got my 2-car garage, I got my insurance, I got my medical, and we have high expectations. They have no expectations.
Yeah.
Except, where am I going to eat today? Am I going to survive another day? But life being hard is the same here, there, everywhere. Loneliness is loneliness, whether I have a lot or I don't have much. And I think that's probably the big thing for me has been, I can sit with a person in a prison in a third world country or in a village and just be present with them. And that just is so life-changing for them because they don't have those opportunities.
I heard once in a sermon that hurt people. Yeah.
And transform people. Transform people.
That's right. If you guys had a client list, because there's probably a lot of folks sitting out there thinking like, I need change. I need to grow. I could really benefit from having some structure like this, some framework, a 12-step program, and some camaraderie and fellowship with others. They might be saying a lot of people are hesitant to take that first jump, right? So obviously you guys work with churches, right? You get but there's probably some people that come direct as well, right?
Yeah, we get people from all over, and they find our website, or a lot of people will Google, help, some kind of searching for some form of help, and they'll find us. We get referrals from government, we get referrals from schools, we get referrals from hospitals, and then since we've been around for 23 years, lots of people know us, and then the thousands of people who've come through our groups tell their friends that when they're struggling, our family members, that hey, this help is available, and they come. So it's a very inclusive environment. I wouldn't say we get any more members from participants from our groups from churches or from any place else.
Gotcha.
They just come from society in general.
I guess a lot of the folks from the third world countries and whatnot, they may not have a church. They don't have a church around every corner like we do down here in the South.
No, matter of fact, when they started doing our groups in Africa, they met under trees in the shade. I
bet you guys have probably been the source of a lot of church plants, probably because of this stuff.
Yeah.
Over the years, 23 years, there's no telling.
And one of my favorite outcomes of our groups is many of our participants decided then to become therapists, and many of them went to Trevecca. Actually,
really? That's fantastic.
They have a great program at Trevecca.
They absolutely do. It was funny on a previous episode. I was talking about how being there. We were talking about alumni programs in sports and how some universities do a really good job and others don't do it as well. And I kind of threw them under the bus a little bit, saying that I'd probably go back to campus a lot more if they asked, or just sent me an email or just did anything. To do that. But there's some great people there. And at the end of the day, the baseball alumni program is, in the big scheme of things, probably ain't, it's not what they're really focused on at the, just like you're saying, but it's a great university, and man, there's been amazing people, that have, come out of there and blessed this world. And I know, who knows where I'd be if I didn't have them to help tame a young Nick Hyder in my college days.
Well, it's really cool is some of our people that went through our programs got their life transformed. And so they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. Then they go back to school like Trevecca and get their master's at 50 years of age in counseling and spend the rest of their life helping other people. And that's really been a great experience for me.
So what advice? I'm a guy. This is a question for me. All right. So people have told me a lot. Nick, you have a cool story. When are you going to put out a book? And I'm like, I don't know, it's something that's been a bucket list of mine for a long time, and I feel like now I finally kind of have an idea of how I want to use my story. I have the premise for the first book. So, what does your writing process look like, and what advice would you have for me who wants to write one?
Well, when Thomas Nelson hired me and gave me the contracted with me to write the 5 books, I told him I've never written a book. I haven't written since I wrote a paper in college. And what they said was, we want you to think of you're creating a book. And so they taught me a process. You create the spine, you create the premise, and then once you have the spine, then you start filling in the content. And then what they do is, there's professional writers and editors, and they clean up my raw content and fashion it and shape it to where it really sounds good. And then you get into a process. So what I do is I constantly research, read. I read all the time. I'm reading books constantly. And ended up, that was my gift, was that I can remember everything I've read if it interested me. And so I can remember things I read, 50 years ago. And so, or if I see a movie, or see a play, or hear a song, I hear somebody give a speech, I can connect it all back. And so I take my cell phone, my iPhone, and I constantly am recording streams of thoughts, consciousness. That's where I collect my intellectual properties, as they would say.
Yeah.
And I form it, and then I get into a process of getting that organized and getting it down. So instead of thinking I'm going to sit at a computer and just think and create, some people may be able to write that way. I go to Radnor Lake and I hike, and then the whole time I'm there, I'm processing. And
what's a different type of book? Some people, they got contracts for a book series or whatever, but if they're not called to write the book, if they're just there, they write fiction or whatever it may be, that's totally different than the type of book that you're writing, right?
Yeah, right. That's a lot different.
Yours is coming directly from the heart. If your heart had a mouth, that's the book, right?
Yes.
And we've mentioned the 12-step program a couple times. Tell me a little bit more about those, and I'm totally cool if you want to list all 12 of them. I got a pen and I take notes, baby.
Well, the 12 steps were written back in the 1930s through Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, an Oxford group, Christian evangelical group that was working with alcoholics, and they came up with a process for those fellow alcoholics. Those 12 steps are, step 1 is I admit I'm powerless over my human condition. Step 2, I came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. And then step 3, I make a decision, turn my will and my life over to His care, which is those first 3 steps work together. Then steps 4, we take fearless moral inventory. We look at our life and we take an honest, painstaking look at what we've done and the whole thing. In step 5, we share that with another human being. It's like a confession. This is what I've done. In 6 and 7, we look at our character defects, which are the foundations from our behaviors. They'll flow from that. 8 and 9, we look at people we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, we do that. And then 10, 11, and 12 are the maintenance steps. And then
you got to maintain, right?
It's for anything.
Yeah.
I really believe that's why I use the word journey all the time, is that we'll be on this journey, this process for the rest of our lives. You just don't get there. You're getting there a little bit more every day that you're in it, but you don't get there one day and then I don't have to work the process anymore. That's probably the fastest path to relapsing back into old behaviors, is disconnecting from the community, disconnecting from the process. I think that why humility is the foundation of recovery. Once you think I got it, grandiosity, we're in trouble.
That's right.
Stay humble, stay hungry. I need it. That's why sometimes you go to recovery groups, there'll be a person in there saying, they've been there 30 some years. Why are they still going?
Man, I felt that way about being broke. That I was, trying to raise a family and basically failing. I couldn't support him financially in the beginning. So like, that feeling drives me to this day. Like I still remember, I can still feel it exactly how I felt every day as a failure. And like, so like, I perform best when my back's against the wall, because like that, I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna put my head put mind to things, and things are gonna happen. But like, no matter, we've been extremely blessed in our journey. I'm married to an amazing woman, and who put up with me through all those things, and has supported me and been the backbone for me to lean on and everything else. Man, like, I can't tell you how much I fear that feeling. And like, so I wake up every day and I run like heck from it, as far and as fast as I can, as far away from it as I can. So like, even though I'm 10 years removed from that, I can still feel it just like it was yesterday.
That's a good fear, to remember that, and to stay on the path. That's a phrase that I'm using in my new book, is staying on the path. Don't look back too far where you get stuck back there. Don't look to right and left. Don't look too far ahead that you're.
Yeah, it's all about consistency too, man. Those habits, man.
Those habits are strong.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things we really work with our readers on our new book, is how those habits are formed, but more importantly, how we can dissolve them and form new ones to replace them. That's
right. You can totally change your beliefs 100%. You sure can. Well, man, it's like I say, I'm not ashamed of who I was back then. I mean, I am, but not to the point where like I hide from it, or I'm not afraid to talk about it. Like that, the journey from who I was back then to who I am now, like what you see today isn't like that. Knowing the journey, that's what makes it cool, and that's what makes it impressive, right?
Yeah. I always like to say we are not defined by our past, but we have an opportunity to use our past.
That's right.
To grow into our best self possible.
Your past is not a life sentence.
No, and God meets us where we are, and that truth is where we start, and that's why I always tell you, today can be day one for anybody.
Yeah,
and we can always make a new beginning. Do you know, Nick, that the brain that makes millions of new brain cells every day, it's called neurogenesis. So every day the brain has an opportunity to learn something new, to overcome an old neural pathway to form a new one. But it takes great focus and great concentration. It needs to be sustained. I've always said that transformation is consistency plus time plus grace equals transformation.
It don't happen by accident. It happens on purpose.
It happens on purpose by being intentional.
That's right. We like to say around here that a purpose-filled life, like everything you do, should be on purpose.
Make today count.
Absolutely. Well, brother, like I'm so excited for your podcast and your new podcast and your upcoming book. What are some things in store that you might be able to leak a little bit about what's coming with the podcast? Any secrets that you can give today or anything like that?
We're going to go through all the chapters of the new book.
Excellent.
So I think it's a great opportunity for the listeners to hear how this book could be life-changing for them.
It's one thing to read it, but to actually like get understand why the author wrote the words that they wrote, that's cool.
And we're having great discussions about each of those chapters. So it can provide you a path.
Absolutely.
To a new beginning.
Absolutely. And for those folks out there that are like, man, like, I'm so glad that I was introduced to Scott and Restore Small Groups from this episode. And I would love to be a part of the journey. I would like to help. Obviously they can buy all of your books at restoresmallgroups.org, right?
Yes, and they can get them on Amazon.
Amazon too, and basically anywhere you can buy a book, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say to those folks? What would you say to those folks?
make a new beginning now. Don't hesitate. Urgency to me is one of the things that we really try to work with people on, is that when is the best time to change? Right now.
Wait's a 4-letter word.
Yes. I mean, right now, today. You know, and I'm in my 60s, and there's still some major areas that I feel God and I are growing in, and those need to change now and today.
Dude, 60's the new 40. Are you looking at this guy right now? My goodness.
And so I want people to know that this is real. We really can have transformation and experience a new life. And the reality is that our circumstances are difficult.
That's right.
Life is hard. And if it's not hard today, it will be eventually.
That's right.
It's going to come. And so if you can move into this type of a healing community, and you can get into this process with God, and there's such a difference between learning about God and experiencing God working with you and in you in your human condition through a healing community. Brene Brown says, wherever you can find those communities, sprint to them.
That's right.
Find them, because she says it's save your life.
You got to seek them, though, right? You got to seek them. And you got to definitely pay attention to the people that you spend your time with, man, because there's, those people might be hurting too. And again, hurt people.
That's
right.
Because what we all are longing for requires vulnerability, and that is to be fully known. And that is, to me, the greatest gift that we can offer a person, is that sacred space where they can be known and be vulnerable, and it not hurt them, but actually heal them.
Man. Well, Scott, any final thoughts that you would want to leave the folks with?
Just that our world is getting worse, it seems, at times. We need to make this. We're hoping to create a movement around the world that these groups, these small healing communities, will grow and grow, and people will get into this space. Because all the things that we read about and we hear about are so tragic and bad that happen with people. And we always hear, how could somebody do that? It's if you study the human condition, you wonder why it doesn't happen more often.
Yeah.
We're lonely, we're isolated, we're broken, and we're in need of grace and healing. We need each other.
Yeah. And
that's where the community aspect comes in. And so I would just encourage you, we can change our world by changing ourselves first.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, brother, thank you so much for hanging with me today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Nick.
Absolutely was. Well, folks, once again, big thank you to 6-time author, new podcaster, and the founder and executive director of Restore Small Groups, Scott Reall. The name of the podcast is Searching Inward, and stay tuned for that new book to hit the press later this year. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Hitstreak. I am your man, Nick Hyder. God bless.